In Canada, there is a highway known by a darker name, Highway 16, the Highway of Tears. It stretches through British Columbia and into Alberta, a long, lonely ribbon of road, stained by decades of unsolved cases, particularly those involving Indigenous women. Today, we focus on a case that embodies the pain, the failures, and the injustice that clings to that highway, the case of Amber Tuccaro. Born in 1990, Amber was a young mother from Fort McMurray, Alberta. She was vibrant, full of promise, and deeply loved by her family. But on a sweltering August day in 2010, she made a choice that sealed her fate. She accepted a ride from a stranger near Edmonton. Her disappearance immediately raised red flags, and her family's desperate attempts to find her were met with what they describe as indifference and incompetence by the authorities sworn to protect them. Amber's case is one of the high number of missing and murdered Indigenous women of Canada. It is a story of a young life violently taken, and an investigation that was later deemed deficient, a double tragedy that speaks volumes about systemic failure, and a pursuit of justice that continues to this day. Amber Tuccaro, at the age of 20, was a single mother, focused on building a stable future for herself and her young son, Jacob. She was a member of the Mikisew Cree First Nation, and like many others, had traveled south from her home in Fort McMurray to the Edmonton area. In August 2010, Amber and her 14-month-old son, accompanied by her brother and a friend, checked into a local motel just south of Edmonton in the small community of Nisku, Alberta. The purpose of the trip was simple. Her brother was being released from a correctional facility in the area, and the family was there to pick him up. The date was August 17, 2010. The plan was to collect her brother the next morning and return home. That evening, Amber decided to travel into the city of Edmonton, specifically the International Airport area, to meet a friend. Her brother and friend elected to stay behind at the motel with Jacob. The distance was short, but the area was sprawling, commercial, and largely isolated at night. Amber, lacking a car, decided to hitchhike. This decision, though dangerous, was sadly commonplace in this region, especially along the routes that skirt Highway 16, where reliable public transit is often non-existent. She was last seen walking away from the Nisku motel, stepping into a stranger's vehicle, and into the unknown. The family became alarmed when Amber failed to return to the motel on the night of August 17th. Her son, Jacob, was only a baby, and Amber was a dedicated mother, never failing to call or check in. By the morning of August 18th, the family reported Amber missing to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP. According to the Tuccaro family, the initial police response was dismissive. They alleged that the RCMP downplayed their concerns, suggesting Amber was simply a young woman who had voluntarily left the area or gone on a spontaneous party trip. This dismissiveness, this early failure to act, would later become a focal point of the massive public outcry against the investigation. Crucially, the family reported receiving a call from Amber's phone shortly after she disappeared. It was a brief, confusing conversation with a frantic Amber confirming she was in a vehicle with an unidentified man. This call provided a crucial piece of evidence, an audio recording of Amber's voice and the voice of the male driver. The RCMP released the audio recording months later. It is a short, chilling clip featuring Amber speaking nervously to the driver, who can be heard responding in a calm but unsettling manner. The conversation implies the driver is taking her down a back road against her wishes. The male voice says, "Are you walking back or are you going back to the motel?" Amber sounds strained as she replies, "No, I'm going to take you down this road. Where are we going?" This clip became the definitive sound of the case, a final, terrifying fragment of Amber's last moments, and a key to identifying the killer that ultimately went unused for too long. Despite the mounting fears of the family and the urgency of the situation, the official RCMP investigation lagged. A 2018 federal review of the case, released years later, detailed what the Tuccaro family had always suspected. The RCMP investigation was deficient and did not comply with procedures and guidelines. The key deficiencies included: firstly, the delay in treating the case as suspicious. By initially categorizing Amber as a voluntary missing person, the crucial first 48 hours of investigation were lost, allowing the perpetrator to establish a solid head start. Secondly, the failure to properly manage the motel room. Witnesses and potential evidence in the immediate area were not secured or interviewed effectively. Thirdly, and perhaps most criminally negligent, the delay in releasing the audio evidence. The recording that contained the voice of the killer was not released to the public for nearly a year after Amber's disappearance. Had it been released immediately, a member of the public might have recognized the unique, calm cadence of the perpetrator's voice, potentially leading to an immediate arrest. The Tuccaro family was left to conduct their own investigation, desperately driving the lonely roads, placing posters, and fighting against a wave of systemic apathy. They were forced to deal with police who often lost key paperwork, failed to follow up on leads, and continuously suggested Amber would simply turn up. This failure of process effectively handed the killer a massive advantage, ensuring that the few crucial leads generated by the crime were allowed to run cold. The mystery of Amber's location persisted for nearly 2 years. The family continued their relentless advocacy, keeping her face and her case in the public eye, never allowing the authorities to dismiss her entirely. Then, in the spring of 2012, the worst fears of the family were tragically confirmed. In May 2012, the remains of Amber Tuccaro were discovered. They were found by a group of horseback riders on a remote property near Leduc, Alberta, not far from where she was last seen, and close to the back road implied in the final audio recording. The location was a wooded area, and her remains were scattered, having been exposed to the elements for nearly 2 years. The discovery immediately shifted the case from a missing person file to a homicide investigation. The immediate assumption was that she had been murdered shortly after she was last seen, on or around August 18, 2010. The location of the discovery was significant. It confirmed the terrifying implication of the phone call. The unidentified driver had taken her to a secluded area where the crime was committed and the body discarded. The proximity of the remains to the Nisku area confirmed that the killer was likely local, or at least very familiar with the secluded routes around the Edmonton International Airport. The killer was not a transient traveler, but someone who knew the landscape and felt comfortable returning to it. The investigation was formally relaunched, but the 2-year delay meant that any chance of fresh physical evidence or the capture of the killer had dramatically diminished. The search for a suspect with the distinctive voice became the central and most challenging aspect of the renewed police effort. Following the discovery of Amber's remains, the RCMP focused intensely on the audio recording and the potential suspects. The man's voice on the recording is calm, almost unnervingly so. He speaks with what experts determined was a Canadian accent and uses casual language, indicating he may have been trying to appear friendly and non-threatening while diverting her from the main road. The key to the case became identifying this voice. The RCMP zeroed in on several individuals, particularly one man who matched both the general description of the vehicle scene and who had connections to the area. However, the investigation struggled with corroboration. Witnesses were vague, and the initial failure to secure the scene meant that definitive links were impossible to forge. Despite numerous pleas to the public and the wide release of the audio clip, the man's voice was never definitively identified by the public or matched to a known individual in the criminal database. As of 2025, the case of Amber Alyssa Tuccaro remains unsolved. The enduring legacy of her case is twofold: the tragedy of a young mother's life brutally cut short, and the painful realization of how systemic deficiencies in policing allowed a perpetrator of violence against an Indigenous woman to slip away. Amber's mother, Sheila Tuccaro, has become a tireless advocate for justice, demanding accountability for the failures of the investigation and demanding that the case remains open. The family fights not only for Amber, but for all the missing and murdered Indigenous women whose cases have been neglected along the long, lonely stretch of the Highway of Tears. The quest for justice for Amber Tuccaro is the ongoing fight for truth and for the dignity of those failed by the system.
Hey there! Before you take off, we'd just like to take a second and say that we really appreciate you sticking around to the end of the video. Katie and I are so grateful for the incredible Case Files community, so thank you for being a part of it. If you want to help the Case Files continue to grow, one of the easiest things you can do is leave a like on this video and consider subscribing. Be sure to hit that notification bell as well and select all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. We want you to know that we truly appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much, and we hope to see you soon.